Joining us now is actually, surprisingly enough, a very strong advocate of Hindutva, is Ben Burgis. He is the author of Oh, we have his song, but first I will say he's the author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. He's a newly minted instructor at Georgia State Perimeter College, where he's a professor teaching logic. And he also has an excellent Patreon page of which you should become a member. And he's also the recipient of this really exciting intro song. Ben, are you excited to hear your song?
Always.
Let's go. I want to go to mockery really badly.
I will.
So please go.
Okay.
You got to restrain me. Debunk all of it. Logical analysis. You're going to show us how to argue that. Go.
This is based on data from a bunch of different countries. There's abundant evidence that at this point that's bullshit. Breaking down these right-wing arguments and looking at how they're supposed to fit together.
Break it down. Break it down. Break it down. Ben Burgis, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so Ben, we're going to be talking about, if you actually wanted to personify it as a person, you could say Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, but more broadly, is this
Are those people?
Sorry?
Are those people?
Right. Indeed. More broadly, there's a pernicious capitalist myth of the lone genius creator, and we have 3 different clips to start off with. This is what we're debunking, and we're going to and you picked out some horrifying examples of this. First is George Gilder's. Look up his work on Silicon Valley and interesting history of economic predictions. Here he is for PragerU talking about the entrepreneur.
That all economic systems reflect the intrinsic self-concern of human beings. But only capitalism creates a group of people known as entrepreneurs who have no choice but to concern themselves with the needs and desires of others.
Okay, and now we have Steve Buscemi. Oh, no, Ayn Rand.
Ayn Rand.
Sorry, go ahead.
The businessman is the man who has to use his mind to deal with reality, to study facts, to produce material goods. He is the man who serves as the transmission belt of the discoveries of science and carries the products of science to all levels of society. He is the one who takes the invention of a theoretical scientist or of an inventor, transforms them into useful products, and putting them into mass production makes them available to all levels of society. The businessman is the man who has achieved the enormous, historically miraculous rise in the standard of living of mankind during the 19th century.
As you watch Ayn Rand, could you literally imagine anybody besides the CEO of a coal company that violates environmental standards or a school shooter being interested in listening to this woman? I certainly can't. And this brings us to our third example. I don't know who this guy is. I think he's the chairman of the American Cuck Society. Oh, no, excuse me. I'm just kidding. His name is Robin Sharma, and he's a leadership coach. I know that, and by the way, I apologize, Ben. I know that you've benefited from his work, so I didn't mean to be disrespectful. Here he is for the final clip.
And perhaps like you, but I'm fascinated by Steve Jobs. I mean, Isaacson's biography on Steve Jobs is still one of my favorite books. I'm fascinated by Elon Musk. I'm fascinated by a Richard Branson. I'm fascinated by a Rockefeller. I'm fascinated by a Henry Ford. I'm fascinated by the Tatas. I'm fascinated by the great entrepreneurs of this world.
He wasn't making the titty joke.
A small,
that's a very
or
important
large idea.
Company, the Tata family. I want to do a video like that where we all put on like athleisure wear like that, and we're just like, I'm fascinated by Mao, fascinated by Ho Chi Minh. I want to know about Kwame Nkrumah. All right, Ben, debunk away, sir.
Yeah. So. This is pretty fundamental because every time you get into it with a certain kind of right winger or even a certain kind of like neoliberal Democrat, frankly, about economic inequality and certainly about the idea that we don't have to live with capitalism, that we could in fact do better. that we could have a system where people have real power in their everyday economic lives, then one of the first objections you're going to hear is, but what about the like genius entrepreneurs who need to be incentivized? You know, I understand you think it's obscene that there are these 287 to 1 differentials between, you know, the average pay of CEOs and the average pay of ordinary workers, but we just need that for incentives because like that's the only way to attract these like crazy rare geniuses, you know, who are going to give you business innovations, you know, that are going to lead to economic greatness, and you just don't understand the importance of these innovators like, you know, Steve Jobs, you know, and Elon Musk, you know, that when you see Steve Jobs out there in the old videos, the, you know, black turtleneck introducing, you know, the new product, you know, that's just like, you know, he's coming off of, you know, Mount Olympus, you know, and he's just bearing gifts from the gods, and you're not going to get that if you try to flatten out rates of compensation. You're not going to get that if you don't have this crazy inequality. So you have so you can attract to your company these wonderful genius, you know, business leaders. That's more or less what you get from all these people. And I think that so of course, a lot of this stuff, once you really like dig into the mythology around some of these people, is incredibly exaggerated, you know, just to pick the sort of classic examples. When you look into the details, Thomas Edison didn't actually invent the light bulb by himself. Henry Ford didn't invent the assembly line. And of course, even more so when you're talking about contemporary cases, Steve Jobs didn't invent anything, right? Like that's you know, he wasn't actually.
I'm sorry, Ben. Hold on. Steve Jobs, what?
Yeah. So Steve Jobs was not actually like working in an R&D lab figuring out how to make things work. Right. He what people will say is, oh, you know, he had this vision, you know, that like he directed other people to figure out, you know, how to make it work. But
it would be like if this show happened and I was never actually in the chair. I was like, cover Lula. Shut up. All right, I'm going to leave.
Yeah. Yeah, no, what I did when you first got started, you know, I instructed you to cover Lula and everything, and you know.
Right, exactly. Okay. Yes. I'm just a conduit, Ben.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, studies pretty consistently show that if you look at the literature on worker self-management, that's actually pretty good for productivity and innovation, because, you know, people have this idea that like what it is it's the great genius, you know, this sort of like John Galt figure or whatever that they imagine the Musks and the Jobs to be, who are like sitting alone or, you know, dropping acid or whatever, and they just like come up with the amazing epiphany all at once about how to you know, what the new product is going to be or whatever. But of course, most actual innovation is gradual. It's incremental. Most innovations that improve efficiency are actually come up with by workers who are the closest to the actual production of it. In fact, this is a big problem with hierarchical forms of organization. There's a nice article about this by Kevin Carson that I was looking at from 2006, where he talks about how he talks about a book called Size, Efficiency, and Community Enterprise, where Stein, the author, found the overwhelming bulk of productivity-enhancing innovations involved incremental changes in the work processes, and the people actually engaged in the work process are the ones most likely to notice the ways that it might be improved, which is why, in fact, if you look at worker-owned cooperatives, like Mondragon in Spain is the most famous example. It's actually the largest company, I believe, still in the Basque region in Spain. Say this decades-old federation of worker co-ops, and it's grown over the course of several decades. It's extremely successful. Even though not only do they not have crazy 287 to 1 pay differentials in order to attract these genius innovators, but by federation policy, the maximum allowed pay differential is less than 9 to 1. And lots of cooperatives within the federation refuse on principle to actually even have that much pay inequality within their co-ops, but somehow it's this very successful business. And I think this is when you think about innovation, of course, often, if you want to talk about a general vision, if we actually had a more democratic form of economic organization, then rather than hoping for your lone genius to have this flash of insight about what the general vision could be, you could actually have widespread democratic input about what the vision could be from workers and consumers. But the thing is, if you're going to say this is a necessary ingredient for success, you just need these genius Ubermenschen, like your Jobs and your Musks, to be able to have successful economic enterprises, then you really need to deal with the fact that all the evidence seems to show that cooperatives, it's harder to get one started because for obvious structural reasons about how the capitalist market works. But once they get started, they last as long, they do as well as traditional businesses. And this is there's like a more general lesson about how to think about this stuff here that applies to a lot of things, which is that you don't have to, instead of speculating, oh my God, what would happen if we didn't have these giant pay differentials so we could, so we could incentivize these genius creator, CEO, entrepreneur people. Instead of speculating about that, you could just check to see what actually happens, like in the cooperative sector where you don't have those giant pay differentials. And I guess the final point I make about that is that generalizes, right? This is a really important thing for just to be all nerdishly earnest about this, reasoning in general. Don't fucking speculate when you can just check.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm really dealing with that as I put the finishing touches on the book I'm working on. Dealing with these people. But that's really important. Then, of course, also there's the idea, Elon Musk is built entirely. I mean, he's very talented at getting government research money, basically. And there's the timeless Bill Burr impression of Steve Jobs eating a pear and going to some engineers and going like, see that? I want that to fit in that. Now fucking do it. And then walking off. Just like a much more accurate representation of his role at Apple. And I think we need to look at that mythology, both in terms of how it functions in the destructive way we do capitalism, and also in terms of the bedtime stories it tells individuals about how they can rise in what is a fundamentally structurally disadvantaged environment, and thinking about their own sort of like solo schemes for survival versus structural democratic answers, whether it be, electoral change, movement change, or things like Mondragon, or actually there's significant cooperative economies in Cleveland or Operation Jackson.
Cooperation Jackson.
Cooperation Jackson, excuse me, Cooperation Jackson. I mean, these are, and of course, I mean, they do take, leadership still exists. There's still a Chokwe Lumumba who takes risks and innovates and has courage, but that's in the context of a community, and it's enhanced and carried by that. It's not because of a solo genius, and that's literally never the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're talking about Musk actually owing a great deal of his success to being good at getting government contracts, I mean, this goes right to the core of the mythology, because this is true for all of your classical robber barons who these guys mythologize. Or even like God, my favorite example, we were watching Ayn Rand earlier, and if you read Atlas Shrugged, like she sets her, her like genius, engineer, business leader in a railroad company. Well, railroads are things that wouldn't exist without state intervention, right? That's like,
What does the railroad company do? He takes state money and turns it to himself and then whines about paying taxes. Artesia, do you have anything to add to this? What do you think of this myth, genius, creator thing?
Well, first of all, that last guy, I forget his name. He's probably friends with Jay-Z. I'm sure of that. Just
that guy wishes.
Yeah, but just from his outfit, he just seemed like he would be friends with him. We always believe these like non-spiffy, swaggerless people who, sell us this myth of how we're gonna be great if we just like hunker down and do hard work. So I've seen him before, not like him, but I've seen the hymns of the world before. But when he mentions robber barons, right, and these like iconic robbers, right, because they stole lots of money and they hoarded it, and now their names are on things around the country, and we get to celebrate them. It did take me back to our conversation about Jay-Z, right, because rap is so obsessed with these robber barons, right? It's like who I was kind of brought up to believe in. It's so many of these names. And now that I'm looking at a Jay-Z and this like misstep with the NFL, and then I'm thinking about the relationship between money and capitalism and robber barons, all I want to know is like, how do we stop telling these myths? Like, where do these narratives come from that are just like part of our culture and our society? And I'm remembering like learning about Rockefeller and all of those people, all these people that guy names, like I learned about them in high school, and to celebrate them. But then it's like they stole mad money, yo. They like what? They stole mad government resources in order to be rich. They did not do that in a vacuum. That was just them. Like they needed a whole government structure in order to do that. So,
and can I just say, and also, half cheap shot, half relevant point, when Elizabeth Warren says, "I'm a capitalist to my bones," that's an homage to the same mythology and an imagined past when it could be managed. And yes, there were times where it was managed better, but fundamentally, this is the engine.
This is not the time.
You gotta deal with the engine.
Yeah, this is.
And you
this
can't
is not
buy
the time.
into the myth.
You can't buy into the myth. That's what I'm taking from this conversation and what I'm gonna leave with today. You can't buy into the myth. I'm gonna tell everybody that.
I love it. That should have been the name of the show. Ben, final thoughts.
Yeah. Fun piece of historical trivia that you're probably not taught in school. Where where the very first cell phone was invented?
I'm guessing in some type of like government lab in Delaware or in the Soviet Union.
Geography is way off. Soviet Union.
Of course.
Of course.
We'll make it the phone so good. I mean, there's going to be a project now. Like the interesting project now about the Soviet Union is not like, it's not the old fail where people are like, no, actually it was great. And, and Stalin wasn't a mass murderer and all this type of stuff. That's ridiculous. That's childish. And we can't replace one fundamentalism with another. But the interesting sort of area of scholarship now, I think specifically with the Soviet Union is to say, well, first of all, it's to say for a lot of normal people, they were pound for pound better off under it because there has not been political and civil liberties liberations in the Soviet bloc. And economically, they were better off than they are under unregulated gangster capitalism orchestrated by the World Bank and IMF. And then it's also to look at the Soviet Union and say, what were the things that it did achieve? Not as a way of minimizing its failures and abuses, but those things are quite well known and understood. What's interesting is to explore the areas that they might have actually achieved some things. And that's frankly just a smarter, more adult way of looking at everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you can be crystal clear that it's not our, preferred model of what a post-capitalist society should look like, while also saying that, that it's like a rich source of material to study about, what worked, what didn't work, what you can learn from it, positive and negative. And, when it comes to something like that piece of trivia about the cell phone, I mean, the point there isn't even to say that that's like that means that like that anything particularly amazing necessarily even about the Soviet Union, but that it underlines the fact that, inventions are typically the products, well, not of individuals, but of teams, right? Of people, right? These things are made by engineers. They're not made by systems. The question is, what can the system do to enable it, and to use the results of that in socially positive or socially negative ways?
Ben Burgis, author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, Order It Immediately, professor at Perimeter College of Georgia State University, and proprietor of a great Patreon page, which everybody should check it out. Ben, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks as always.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.